The best of money matters. Wealth Tracker.
Welcome to the Wealth Tracker, where we dive into the uncharted territories of niche investment strategies that promise to redefine wealth. I'm Nadiah Koh. Asia's fintech landscape is undergoing a profound transformation, driven by rapid advancements in technology, evolving consumer expectations, and a renewed focus on financial inclusion. From real-time payments and cross-border innovations to the rise of embedded finance and AI integration, the region, particularly Southeast Asia, is positioning itself as a global leader in digital finance. With both traditional banks and fintech players working towards a more unified, accessible financial ecosystem, the conversation around innovation, regulation, and collaboration has never been more critical. So what are the key trends, opportunities, and challenges shaping the future of fintech across Asia? Well, to find out more, joining me now is Danny Levy, Managing Director of Asia, Australia, and New Zealand of Money 2020. Danny, welcome to the show.
Hi there, thanks for having me on the show. Really happy to be here.
All right, Danny. Southeast Asia has continued to emerge as a key region of interest for fintech stakeholders globally. What are the main drivers behind this growing focus on Southeast Asia for fintech expansion?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So we released a report actually earlier in the year in January called The Future of Fintech in APAC. And this really brings the scale of the opportunity into focus. So almost 1 in 3 respondents said that they're prioritizing expansion into Southeast Asia. And they're highlighting key markets like Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines. And the region itself, it's clearly massive. So over 680 million people, $3.6 trillion GDP. And it's actually one of the fastest growing middle classes in the world. And we see that it's also very digital first. So there's more than 440 million online users in the region. And this is really fueling the rapid adoption of fintech solutions. At the same time, clearly financial inclusion, this remains a major challenge across the region. So over 70% of ASEAN's 680 million people, they're either unbanked or underbanked. And some examples that we have are 85% of Myanmar's population is unbanked, 69% in Vietnam, 65% in the Philippines, and over half of the population in Indonesia. So this shows just how much room there is for digital banking payments and lending solutions. And governments across the region are actively supporting innovation. So open banking frameworks, digital ID programs, and regulatory sandboxes, they're becoming more common, making it easier for fintechs to grow safely. And, clearly strategically, Southeast Asia, it sits between China and India, and it benefits from major trade flows and agreements like the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is a regional free trade agreement. And lastly, I would just say that the digital economy, which I've mentioned, it's projected to hit $1 trillion GMV by 2030. So, it's no surprise really from our perspective that Southeast Asia is now seen as a top fintech growth market. And, clearly that's today and also in the future as well.
Right. So you've mentioned that Southeast Asia is particularly ripe for fintech growth. So which trends or subsectors do you think will gain the most traction in the coming years?
Yeah, that's another very good question. So again, from our research, I've gone through a few points there previously, but as you say, it's really ripe for fintech growth. And, that's really a perfect storm of things coming together. So first, as I mentioned previously, there's a massive unbanked and underbanked population. And at the same time, smartphone and mobile wallet adoption is skyrocketing. So we see people moving straight to digital. They're skipping traditional banking altogether. And this is really being driven by a tech-savvy youth. Across the region, there's a median age of 30 and smartphone penetration exceeding 75%. And this is really driving rapid adoption of mobile-first solutions. We're also seeing a huge focus on technology-led innovation. So AI, it's being aggressively adopted, and it's being adopted to personalize experiences and to fight fraud. And we're also seeing that biometrics are making transactions faster and more secure. And blockchain technology, we're seeing that really help fight challenges and fix challenges like slow and costly cross-border payments. So there's 2 points there. And also I'd just say, lastly, regulations. So regulations are stepping up with open banking initiatives, regulatory sandboxes, and they're really creating an environment where fintechs can innovate while keeping customer data and cybersecurity front of mind. So, it's worth noting that financial inclusion and social impacts are becoming major drivers. And it's not just about profit, but actually it's about access to millions, giving access to millions who've historically been left out.
Right. So there's a notable shift in fintech where social impact and financial accessibility are taking center stage. What role do you believe fintech can play in achieving broader social good across Asia?
So, we see fintech playing a really key role actually in driving social good across Asia. Again, if we look at our research, we see that around 95% of organizations are actually prioritizing financial inclusion, and fintechs are actually outperforming traditional banks when it comes to reaching underserved groups. So a good example actually is there was a study, I think, by the Center for Impact Investing. And if I remember rightly, the study found around 63% of fintech users are actually first-time customers. And I think that was compared to around 46% for traditional banks. So, powerful stats. And, it's not just about technology. Real change actually requires a cultural shift. So real cultural shift. And in some parts of Asia, there's obviously deeply rooted barriers. So, an example like women's access to financial services, and these need to be addressed alongside providing new tools. So while fintech can definitely help, right, we need to also bring more adoption across the whole kind of the ecosystem. So that's on education, it's on accessibility. So we've got to break down cultural barriers as well. It can't only be fintech in isolation.
Right. There's also that gap between traditional and digital bankings narrowing as both embrace emerging technologies. How do you see the relationship evolving between legacy banks and digital challenges, and what technologies are proving most transformative in this space?
Yeah, so I think when fintech first came onto the scene, right, there was a big thing around kind of the fintech digital banking players going up against the traditional incumbent banks. But actually what we're seeing now is that the lines between digital challenges and legacy banks are definitely starting to blur. So our research shows that both are actually focusing now on the same core goals. So things like improving customer experience, scaling operations, but they're serving different customer segments. So while they may have different business models, both types of banks are heavily regulated and face similar market pressures. So there's a big shift that is actually that they're adopting similar technologies and strategies to stay competitive. So what we would say is that, I guess, even though digital challenges in traditional banks may have started off on separate paths, they're both moving towards a more unified vision of modern banking. And that's around agility, it's around customer-first approaches, and keeping up in a rapidly digital world.
I see. What are some of the key benefits and potential pitfalls of partnering with traditional banks or financial institutions in Asia?
Yeah, so, there's a lot of benefits. I'd say, to narrow it down, I'd say partnering with traditional banks in Asia has some great benefits, clearly. They bring strong brand recognition, a massive customer base, deep regulatory experience, and this can really help digital players scale quickly. But there are potential pitfalls as well. So traditional banks can sometimes be slow to innovate or too focused on maintaining control, and this can limit the flexibility that the kind of digital natives, the fintechs, they actually need. And, another challenge is that banks might use their influence to push for regulations that favor them. And this could stifle competition and innovation. So, that said, the rise of embedded finance and super apps is pushing both sides to think bigger and more customer first. So really, I would say that the key is to getting partnerships that balance innovation with stability, whilst also navigating an increasingly complex regulatory environment.
Right. Looking at some of the opportunities and challenges in scaling cross-border payment solutions, how is your organization leveraging technologies like blockchain or real-time payment networks?
Yeah, so, cross-border payments in Asia, it's packed with opportunities. But again, there's obviously challenges as well. So we actually released a report last week at Money 2020 Asia in Bangkok. And the report is called How Will Asia's Money Move in the Future? 2025's view of 2035. And, in the report, this really drives home some key findings. So we found, just to call out a few, we found that 53% of respondents see Singapore leading the charge on cross-border payments. And this isn't surprising given how much innovation is happening here in Singapore. And when we asked what matters most to the future of cross-border payments in Asia, we found that 88% were focused on interoperability. They see that as absolutely critical. And 86% pointed to the importance of strong policy support. So I would say with Asia's kind of diverse legal system, scaling financial infrastructure across borders without strong policy support, it's going to be very, very hard. So, we're seeing progress. So a good example in Singapore is a stablecoin framework that was introduced in 2023, but many countries still haven't developed clear regulations, and this can really slow down progress. We're also seeing a challenge around the usage of cross-border payment systems. Many of them are still very, very siloed, which is another issue. So this makes transactions slow, it makes it costly, it makes it complex, it adds to a lot of friction in the payments. So the good news is that we're seeing more effort towards interoperability, which I mentioned before is really critical. So payments networks are starting to connect, which should reduce friction. It's still early days, but we expect greater focus on interoperability over the next decade. And lastly here, I would just say that at Money 2020 Asia in Bangkok last week, payments was one of the real key focuses. We looked at collaboration, security, frictionless experiences, sustainability, and emerging technologies. And we had 67 sessions on payments technology and 58 companies speaking, so the likes of Airwallex, Wise, and Gcash. And they were sharing their insights on how this space is rapidly growing and evolving. So, Money 2020 Asia really the number one show in the region for payments and cross-border payments.
Right. So you mentioned that Money 2020 Asia just happened last week, taking place in Bangkok on April 22nd to 24th. So what are some of the key insights from this event that you think fintech leaders in Asia should be paying closest attention to?
Yeah, so, as I said, 280 speakers, 3 days, you can imagine there was a lot that went on. But I think some of the key things that happened, the focus on the global volatility and the US tariff surge, it's clear that Asia needs to move away from fragmentation and isolated approaches. So, we looked at the future of fintech. It's all here about, working together, collaboration, partnerships are key. And I think that really came loud and clear at the show, when we were looking at things like the US tariff surge. Emerging markets, so, we saw that legacy banks are showing that they're willing to partner with local digital banks. And there's a new wave of digital challengers entering Asia who mostly wants to compete. Really what we also saw was that they're building trust, these new digital players, by teaming up with retailers and not the big banks. So there's still, that being said, there's still very few digital banks that are profitable in the space. And traditional banks are modernizing fast, so embracing new technologies to defend their ground. So, the future looks like a mix of competition, partnership, and consolidation between kind of old and new players within the digital banking space. On the payment side, we saw about it being, companies being brave enough to embrace new models, so adapting fast to changing consumer behavior and making money move faster and smarter. I think a good example of this at the show was UPI's success, and that really shows that collaborating with fintechs isn't optional anymore. It's essential for scale and simplicity. And we also saw at the show across a lot of sessions and discussions and deep dives around kind of digital transformation, but especially around AI-driven banking models for financial inclusion. So companies like Kakao Bank taking off. And also, I would say the rise of Sharia-compliant digital tokens and stable coins, making moves in cross-border payments. And another good example there from the show I remember was a pilot between Coins PH and the BSP in the Philippines, which was a great example as it shows how fast innovation is happening. And as I say, what really stood out at the event really just was the quality of the conversation. So not just high-level keynotes, but deep dive workshops and discussions at the event. Last year we had 300 speakers, this year 280 speakers, all new at the event. So we didn't repeat any speakers at the show, which is really quite incredible. And Money 2020, all of the speakers are on stage on merit. So, we don't select who speaks. We don't accept sponsor speaking slots. Everyone applies to speak. And again, that really adds to the delegate, the attendee, and the quality of the content experience.
Right. So lots to unpack from Money 2020 Asia.
A lot.
But Danny,
yes.
looking ahead, Danny, what major trends do you believe will define the next phase of fintech in Asia?
Yeah, so again, across the financial ecosystem, there's a lot to unpack, there's a lot to talk about, but there's a few big trends that are really going to define the next phase of fintech in Asia. So the top three innovations as we see it are artificial intelligence, blockchain, and biometrics. So if we start with AI first, what was interesting, at the show last week is that Asia's top institutions now clearly aren't just reacting to global trends. So we see the major players in Asia now setting the pace, especially when it comes to generative AI. So we're seeing a shift from being reactive to proactive with banks and fintechs using AI to stay competitive. And we're seeing companies expand their influence to redefine what leadership finance looks like, both regionally and globally. We're also seeing the future of AI with biometrics, which is really changing the game for security. So the AI biometric market, it was worth $12.7 billion in 2022. It's projected to jump to $50.5 billion by 2031. There's a huge shift happening in that space right now. And we're seeing the fusion of technology, as I said, between AI and biometrics kind of pushing that forward. In Asia Pacific, China and India are really leading the charge, and it's driven by rapid digitization and the growing demand for better, faster, and more reliable ID solutions. And then, really blockchain, as I mentioned. So Asia is really at the forefront within blockchain technology. And a few examples are kind of projects across Thailand, Singapore, Australia. The one standout is the project Enbridge, which is a collaboration between the central and commercial banks. This is built on distributed ledger technology that's really pushing boundaries, I would say, for instant cross-border payments and settlements. So Asia really leading the charge there. And like I said, it's, whether it's faster, cheaper, more transparent cross-border payments through blockchain, AI transforming customer engagement, or biometrics, it's really clear and it's really exciting that Asia is not just part of the fintech story anymore. It's leading the next chapter. So Asia really is the place to be right now for what's next in fintech.
Amazing. All right. Thank you, Danny, for your insights today.
Pleasure. I hope that was useful for you.
Thank you. That was Danny Levy, Managing Director of Asia, Australia, New Zealand, Money 2020. This has been the Wealth Tracker with me, Nadiah Koh.
Before acting on the information on Money FM, please consider if it's suitable for your own investment objectives, financial situation, and risk tolerance. To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.